Welcome back to Dealmakers Conversations. We hope you're enjoying the day so far. In our first segment, an interview with Pam Springer, a serial entrepreneur who many of you know from either her days at Manta or more recently at Oris Intelligence. We hope you enjoy this interview. Well, I'm here with serial entrepreneur and investor Pam Springer. Pam, thanks for joining us here at the Dealmakers Conference.
Thanks for inviting me.
Excellent. Well, Pam, I want to dive into a few different areas with you. First, as an investor, what are some of the criteria you look for in the people with whom you invest?
I think the things that are really important are understanding the market, and for instance, the business model, how much experience they've had with that, and also as you think about how to commercialize the entity, especially for early stage companies. For later stage companies, who have maybe sorted some of that stuff out, co-investing with investors who can bring not just capital to bear, but some of the intangibles like, whether they do introductions or networking. But, typically in all cases, more than just capital, that you can actually add some value to the entity.
That makes a lot of sense, Pam. Are there any traits that you think are most important or critically important for that CEO, owner, or entrepreneur themselves?
Absolutely. One of the first things I always look for, quite honestly, is the strength of the team. Even in early stage, and especially in mid to late stage, it's critical to scaling and succeeding, right? How strong that team is. If it's not very strong, I typically think micromanager, and that's detrimental to scaling. It typically also means, I have seen, and not to over stereotype, that the founder or the CEO acts too much like a general and hires a bunch of lieutenants. So what you'd want to do is a strong team that can scale, that can really dive into areas, especially as the business grows, that now need to perform better, and have that committed resource to do that and build a team around them to continue to do and improve. So strength of team. The other one is how they are successfully, hopefully, implementing a culture. Obviously, it's more than just skills that makes a company successful. So how do they think about culture? Clearly, they have to have some grit. Their ability to focus is important versus getting distracted. And early on, I like to always see about referrals. And not to say it's not important later on either, but customer referrals, that the product is and delivers on its promise. So ideally, the product pulls customers in as opposed to people having to go out and really hard sell this thing. So I'd like to see the pull, ideally, and those customer referrals to validate that.
Those are all great things. Let me ask you this. When you come in to lead an organization like you've done in the past, maybe it's an investment, maybe it's not an investment. What are some of the first steps you're going to take in doing those things and evaluating the team and evaluating the market, the sales strategy, so that you ensure you not only hit the ground running, but can maximize the opportunities for success?
Yeah, so I started earlier on that, understand the market. So you really do need to understand what role you are in the market, what versus your competitors. Do you have and why someone would ultimately buy from you? What is our true strength, right? So understand the market. I would also suggest, and have done, you get involved in the sales cycles. So you want to understand the cycles. You want to understand, of course, the pricing early on. And really, you should always be aware of your pricing probably can be optimized. Early stage companies typically undervalue themselves because they're a little sheepish. So let's not lock ourselves into 3-year contracts right away. Let's do a 1-year contract, and so we can continue to kick the tires on the pricing to make sure we've got that right. Getting involved in sales gives you a lot of opportunities to learn the objections, the competitors, and how do we ideally shorten the sales cycle to make that as efficient as possible, at the same time gain credibility, with our reputation out there. Another key point that I think is super important is, okay, so you have your initial set of sales reps. How do you hire for those sales reps? Are you looking for the domain expertise for whatever vertical you're in? Or do they have to be just solution sellers and you can train them on the domain expertise? Do they also play the role of a sales engineer if it's a software product? So understanding how that works is really important, and the type of salesperson that you need, because a lot of times early on it's the founder, the few that are always selling it, and a lot of it's in their head. And when they go to hand it off to a bunch of people to go sell, that handoff isn't that good. So really getting into there and understanding it. And then lastly, before you hire, you've got your first few salespeople, but before you hire a bunch more, please make sure that your platform can deliver, that you don't get any latency, that you can scale, and you've got the support necessary. And I think what I did really well at Oris was we had a few salespeople, but then we slowed that down while we got the engineering group really to scale and the platform really kicking in. And then we went on and continued on with our sales hiring to make sure you don't disappoint those customers, especially in a renewal business. You want to make sure people renew. And if they're not happy with your product, they're not going to. So early on, you got to make sure if some of those things are really buttoned down.
No, definitely delivering upon the promise is so critical to being able to do these things and to scale.
Yep.
You mentioned, Oris, which you were able to sell last year. Previous to that, you had company Manta became eNext. You've been through a couple different sales at this point.
Mm-hmm.
What lessons did you get from the earlier sales that you applied to the later sales?
Yeah. Well, good, as they say, good companies are bought, not sold, right? And fortunately, in both of those scenarios, we were in that scenario where we were approached. I think things to keep in mind that I've taken away is as you come across investment cycles, whether early stage or late stage, investment cycles where you need to take on more money or what have you, you got to look at the speed of the market that you're participating in and really determine, do you have the time to execute and dominate in the future? So you're going to take on an investment cycle. It's going to take you 24 months to really bake this thing down. In the meantime, your competitors are continuing to go. And as you have to evaluate that, first of all, the dilution, if you take on, more of an equity round, or maybe you take on debt, but really, where are you in the investment cycle compared to where you should be, or how fast your market's going? If you do take on, partners, whether they be venture firms, private equity, you absolutely need to have clarity around their timeframes. So as you think about what's important, who your partner is, of course, and how much time you actually have. And ultimately, if you feel like you can run this thing for a while, you should go ahead and do that. In Manta's case, we had a lot of runway. As with Oris, Oris was 4.5 years into it, and we elected to take that transaction as we contemplated various scenarios, investment cycles, execution, and how fast our market was moving, which it was very fast. And so we got an offer. We had a lot of leverage, and we had an offer that we really, really liked, and we went ahead with it.
Excellent. Well, Pam, I want to thank you for sitting down with us here at the Dealmakers Conference. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Well, we hope you enjoyed that interview with Pam. Next up, Matt Davis of Cohatch, talking about co-location. I think you're going to enjoy this. Hi, I'm here with Matt Davis, the CEO of Cohatch. Matt, thanks for joining us here today at the Dealmakers Conference.
Oh, it's my pleasure. Good morning.
Morning. So as an entrepreneur building a company in these challenging times, what's the biggest issue that you're facing right now?
Oh, there's several. Every company is dealing with a bunch of issues, but I think the biggest one we're trying to deal with is we're seeing, as your business evolves, you see some demand increase, but we're seeing a lot of increasing demand, and you're seeing the industry and the world kind of morph in real time in front of you month by month. So trying to decipher what are true long-term trends versus knee-jerk reactions versus things we want to change our model and adapt it versus human behavior of going back to normal once there is something like a vaccine, and not knowing what the future holds for that and the timing of all that. So, and that also managing through all of our customers or companies also. So, thousands of companies all figuring out the same thing simultaneously. So it makes for interesting days.
I'm sure it does. Has the COVID crisis caused you to reevaluate the growth strategy or even just your focus over at Cohatch?
Yeah, I think everyone needs so these are major world events. So if you're not reevaluating your overall strategy, you're doing something wrong. You're probably living in a cave somewhere. But yeah, so we've definitely reevaluated growth strategy. We determined we are actually accelerating growth in a lot of different areas because of the opportunities that we see. And it's one of those things that we had to shift our designs and how we do things by about 10 or 15%. But I think we kind of observed that we were pretty well placed, being suburban, highly flexible, hybrid type offering for what we do is kind of what the world needs in the future also. So it's really just kind of making sure we have the capital liquidity and all kinds of the ability to continue our growth plan.
Matt, you mentioned that you have accelerated growth because you've seen additional opportunities. Talk a little bit about what those opportunities are, how they're strong, and in your industry, how that's something that's really giving you guys a nice competitive advantage that you would want to accelerate.
Yeah, so we started in 2016 kind of as a mom and pop small co-working, and then evolved to more of a lifestyle club, all things together space. And as we've grown, we really focused a lot on the solopreneur, the freelancer, the 1 to 5 person companies that live in Worthington, walk to work. And we had tons of members and doing really well with that. But then as we started to see the pandemic hit, small businesses get crushed in the short term, right? And that's kind of like breaks your heart to watch a lot of that happen. So we work with those people to kind of make sure that they survive and they do well over that. But it's going to be probably 6 to 18 months to do that. Now we're seeing a significant amount of increased demand from larger companies who are shedding office space, and their needs are different. So we've seen a strong interest. Really, these companies are having totally different problems. There's been a lot of knee-jerk reactions to send everyone home for safety, and which is correct. But now it's like they're trying to figure out their long-term views, but trying to make sure they keep their culture, designing spaces that could keep their innovation, because engineers need to touch things and spitball with each other and learning that everybody has different personality profiles. Your accounting department has a different personality profile than your sales team. Everyone has different life needs at home. Some people have young kids at home. Some people are empty nesters. Some people have their wife working at home or their husband with them, and they're seeing some increased arguments, if you will, being in the same space. Every company wants to shed fixed costs. I think that's one of the huge trends in the future, realizing as the world shifts and moves around, variable cost structures are super important. People were wanting to have arm's length for liability. There's a ton of work to make sure your space is clean and safe and done correctly. And really, that's not your core business at all. And I think the employee more than ever will have power in the future to dictate, I don't care where I live, but I need this to have a happy lifestyle and have some separation. So we took all that into consideration. We're starting to create new products, innovation hubs, collaboration hubs for large spaces, dedicated co-working spaces for their company, but still give them access to the rest of our locations. So as we build out our network and our growth strategy, we have to create some other spaces that give more space for those type of functions, but not go too far, because I honestly don't want to become a very large corporate only space. Keep the humanity and the mission of what we really set out to do to begin with. So that's what our growth strategy has been about, is adding new features, bringing new larger companies. And we really focus on not the company, we focus on the human, the individual, and what they need as we grow. So we have 12 other spaces in development currently, and we keep pushing forward.
Keep it growing. I like hearing that. Let me ask this question. You mentioned earlier about capital. The best of times, cash is king.
Sure.
How might balance sheet management and greater liquidity play a more critical role for you guys these days as you look forward to growing even more?
Yeah, I always view, obviously, cash and liquidity is extremely important. I view it a couple different ways. You have cash generating from operations, which is slowed, but really we built Cohatch in a more variable way where we can shift and move costs around. So it's preserving cash and limiting expenditures during turbulent times is one of them. And there's also the fundraising element of it, which we have seen, one of the things, like anything, that I get asked more often than anything, how how we're like WeWork, or how WeWork's funding issues have caused us pain, or how does, these other co-working spaces that go out of business are causing us pain. And really what it's done is just made everyone, instead of going full speed ahead with us, that just says, take a pause. How are you doing during the pandemic? Let's look at your cash position. Let's look at your balance sheet. Let's look at your growth plans. Let's look at your variable cost structure. And then we move forward and we continue to fundraise. And we really haven't had we've actually had more people interested in what we're doing and adding to our fundraise than ever. So that's where we keep building upon our cash and capital position to keep accelerating. Because at the end of the day, the number of uses out there, when small businesses unfortunately go out of business and more idle assets will become available, and there's just not enough uses in the world to fill them. You can only build so many bars and restaurants, and they're struggling right now. So there's a huge need for us to step in and fill the void, and that's what we're planning on doing.
That's good to hear. Have you seen any new roadblocks during that fundraising or even closing a deal on new space that maybe hadn't cropped up pre-COVID?
Yeah, it's less about a roadblock and more about like a check station, if you will, right? So it's not like stop all traffic. It's more like, hey, stop here, review what you got, let's see how you're doing this. Oh yeah, go on through, right? So it's just being a little bit more deliberate, a lot more questions from banks and investors. But yeah, luckily we've been able to lift the gate and keep moving forward.
Excellent. So looking forward, you mentioned that you've accelerated growth. Where are the new opportunities that have been created for the last half of this year or last part of this year and into 2021 that you're beginning to look at and try to take advantage of?
I advise people all the time, the more turbulent the time, the more you should focus on what kind of diamonds in the rough opportunities are out there. So we've been asked by 5 to 6 other spaces. Several have already shut down. Some are going under. Some have made, bad decisions on taking $30,000 a month in rent in a big high rise, and it's just not working out well with the time. So trying to figure out kind of the M&A, do we want to acquire anybody? And we've said no to everything so far because what we do is so much different, and it'll just cost us too much money to retrofit and do different things. So we're looking at we're seeing a lot of turbulence and a lot of things shut down. So unfortunately, a lot of companies will not survive, and we're trying to make sure that we could pick up and fill those gaps when things do come back. So it's filling kind of the current demand that was already out there, but in a pared down capacity from other people. And then there's the whole point of adding capacity in new markets or towns or suburbs. Because I think the future really is about, if I live in Dublin, I want to work in Dublin, and then occasionally when I need to go meet other people outside of town, I still flex and move. But I'm very adamant about trying to add really valuable spaces and communities, and then giving people flexibility. Like when we go to Indianapolis or Cleveland or Cincy, I already thought that people would use that, but I'm very shocked how fast people are using those other regions. So I think it's kind of a good reassurance that we're doing the right thing. At the end of the day, we got to treat people well, build great products, and if our heart is always to care for people, I think we'll be just fine.
Excellent. Well, Matt, I appreciate you spending some time today with us at Dealmakers and talking about what's going on at Cohatch. Thank you.
No problem. Thank you very much.
Well, we hope you enjoyed those 2 interviews with Matt and Pam. If you don't know where you're headed next, just click on the Agenda tab, pick the session that you're interested in, and add it to your My Agenda. Then we'll see you back here for our next segment of Dealmakers Conversations in about an hour.